We have an economy that's incredible. We have an economy that's so fragile. And the only reason it's running now is it's running off the fumes of what we did, what the Trump administration. It's just running off the fumes. And when there's a crash, I hope it's going to be during this next 12 months, because I don't want to be Herbert Hoover.
As if an attempted coup hadn't made it abundantly clear already that for Donald Trump, it's really never been about what's best for the American people. It's been about what's best for Donald Trump. You heard him right there. In the span of a few breaths, predict an economic collapse, a crash, as he called it, and then wish it on his political opponent for fear that it could hurt his public image. Shocking? I suppose. Surprising from him? Not really. The real head-scratcher is why so many people identify with such an openly hostile, un-American position. Evangelical voters in particular were paying attention to because of the first caucuses in Iowa on Monday. For instance, their beliefs appear to be antithetical to Trumpism or what Donald Trump says, and yet, counterintuitively, they continue to be among his most loyal coalitions. Compelling new reporting from the New York Times asks why. Religion scholars, drawing on a growing body of data, suggest one explanation. Evangelicals are not exactly who they used to be. Quote, being evangelical once suggested regular church attendance, a focus on salvation and conversion, and strongly held views on specific issues such as abortion. Today, it's as often used to describe a cultural and political identity, one in which Christians are considered a persecuted minority. Traditional institutions are viewed skeptically, and Mr. Trump looms large, end quote. Joining me now is a staff writer for The Atlantic and author of the new book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in the Age of Extremism, Tim Alberta. Tim, great to see you again. Thank you for being with us. When your book came out, you and I started this conversation a little bit. You're very, very familiar with the constituency I'm talking about. You are from the constituency that would call itself evangelicals. And you've discussed these changes with me in the past. What do you make of this analysis?
Yeah, look, I think it's right. We have to understand that the primary driver of the evangelical political identity at this moment has very little to do with specific policy proposals, even over some of the most contentious, most divisive, polarizing issues like abortion or like sexuality or school curriculum, indoctrination, alleged indoctrination, CRT, all these other things that will sort of get the headlines. At the end of the day, those policy battles are really not what animate the evangelical mind at this moment. Really, as that piece in the New York Times gets to, it is this sense of aggrievement, this sense of persecution, a very real sense of cultural and political displacement. And so when you think about a voting group that believes that they are losing something, that they are forfeiting a status in society that they have enjoyed and that many believe that they're entitled to. And when you think about it in terms of sort of an us versus them, good versus evil, the enemies are at the gates, how do we fight back against them? Suddenly that relationship with Donald Trump starts to make a lot of sense.
So I want to, for a moment, step away from the cultural identity grievance and talk about the theological, the messianic type of messages that Donald Trump is involved in. I want to play a little bit of an interview that NBC had with a Trump supporter named Bethany at a caucus event in Iowa. Let's talk about it on the other side.
I'm being indicted for you. My first thought went to, well, Jesus Christ died for my sins. Jesus died for me. And so it connects in my brain that way, like, okay, he's doing this for us as a country to make the changes we need to make, and he's the target where we don't have to be.
I mean, it's kind of amazing that Donald Trump succeeded in using that sort of language and having it land the way he was hoping it land with some people like Bethany. Help me out with that one.
Well, look, let me just be really blunt. I think that what you see and what you hear there from Bethany has as much to do with what isn't happening inside of her church, inside of her religious community, as what is happening with Donald Trump. And what I mean by that is that in the absence of serious Bible-based discipleship, a serious Christian catechesis in which followers of Jesus are trained and are taught and are formed to follow him in the right way and to order their spiritual identity ahead of their political or cultural or tribal identities. In the absence of that happening, Ellie, what you see is that sort of conflating of a religious identity with a political identity, and you begin to assign a sort of messianic salvation capability to someone like Donald Trump, or just to anybody in the political arena for that matter. And I think that we can look at Trump all we want as a driver of this, and he certainly looms large in the evangelical imagination at this point. But I think that we have to get back to basics. We as Christians have to get back to basics and try to examine what is being taught, or I think more often what is not being taught inside of our churches, to avoid this sort of idolatry.
There was a time where, starting from Trump's election in 2016 onward, where we understood this relationship between evangelicals and Donald Trump to be somewhat transactional. Donald Trump had promised that he would put conservative judges on the Supreme Court and on courts across the country, and he did. He delivered on that. This article implies, the New York Times article that we've quoted from, implies that it's less about the transaction now. There's something else. It's morphed into a different kind of relationship. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, that's sort of the unifying theme of the book that I've written, which is to say that for folks who feel like the end is near, and that the barbarians are at the gates, and that their time of persecution, which has been prophesied for generations, and that finally it is here, that this is the moment where the forces of good and evil are colliding. You become less concerned with finding allies who are good. You just become concerned with finding allies who will fight against that perceived evil. So what's interesting is that many of Trump's most fervent evangelical supporters, they don't necessarily fall into this trap of assigning some moral rectitude to him, or certainly even falling into this sort of messianic complex. But they will view him as almost a necessary evil. They will view him as somebody who, because he's not a Christian, because he's not bound by biblical etiquette, he doesn't have to play by their rules. Therefore, he is an ideal partner to do the dirty work and to do what's necessary to defeat their shared enemies in the culture. And that is, again, it's dangerous, not just politically, it is deeply destructive at a theological level.
I do recommend